it's no secret that poetry is becoming less important in our lives. People would rather scroll on their Instagram feeds than read poetry. Clearly, less attention is being paid to new poets, and overall, the reading of poetry has gone down significantly in recent years. However, this does not mean that we cannot learn significant and important lessons from poetry. In fact, poetry can give people some of the most invaluable lessons that they will ever learn in their entire lives. This leads us to today's quote by Robert Frost: "Poetry is what is lost in translation." The quote shows that poetry is incredibly dependent on the rhythm and the rhyme scheme. Poetry is so dependent on its rhythm and its rhyme scheme that it cannot be translated. The Odyssey, for example, is an epic poem that is read in high school by most Americans. The Odyssey has been translated dozens of times, showing us that there is not one true or correct translation. The amount of times the Odyssey has been translated shows us that translators cannot agree on the perfect wording for everything in the poem. Clearly, there's no one correct translation, so there's no way to properly know which is right, or if any of the translations are able to perfectly recapture the magic of Homer's original work in Greek. Another example is Shakespearean sonnets, some of the most famous poetry on the planet. In these sonnets, Shakespeare used iambic pentameter, a way to keep the tempo in his poems, which stress the first syllable and unstress the second syllable. Obviously, when you're translating into a different language, the spelling is different and the stress on words is different. So you cannot translate Shakespeare's iambic pentameter into other languages. Iambic pentameter is what most poetry is written in, so clearly this makes it very hard for translators to translate this poetry, as they will lose the iambic pentameter, which is a key part to the rhythm in all poems. Also, in Shakespearean sonnets, the rhyme scheme involved rhyming every other line for 3 quatrains and then having a couplet at the end, which rhymed both lines in a row. Rhyming clearly is not the same in other languages, as words are not the same and they don't rhyme as well. You can't take 2 words in English that rhyme and expect them to rhyme the same way in French. This shows that when you translate it into a different language, you lose the rhyme scheme, and as rhyme schemes are a huge part of poems, you lose this crucial part of the poem. So when returning to today's quote by Robert Frost, "Poetry is what gets lost in translation," the quote shows us that poems are so dependent on their rhythm and their rhyme scheme that it is impossible to translate them into other languages.